to 2005, where we have Peter Jackson's version. And to me, like, one of the most interesting part is the fact that, like, here you really see his fandom of the original, where he puts painstaking dedication to kind of recreate 1933, New York and stuff. And so it's clearly a visual or period piece. And also, like, we see from the very beginning the kind of the doom and gloom of the Great Depression. Like, I mean, he really wanted to capture the different things of the original, but also, like, his take, so to speak, on that time and the whole Kong story.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, that's really actually one of the things that's most interesting about this movie is the CGI kind of recreation of the 30s. I really, really enjoyed that. I thought it was just really, really fascinating to see, because that they would have done maybe quite a lot of research into getting all the visuals right and everything else. Right. So that was really, really well done. In fact, I mean, for me, those were the best CGI in the movie, really. But yeah, I mean, if I had one liner though for this movie, it would be that it's not Peter Jackson presents King Kong, it's Peter Jackson is King Kong. And I'll elaborate on that further as we go. But I mean, I actually really enjoyed this version again, watching it again. So
one anachronism, and I can only think of it as like with just like with some other filmmaker director, we would almost like kind of write it off as like kind of like kind of a either lack of detail or as a like kind of maybe a neglect and stuff like that. But in this case, I can only think of it as it's anachronism, is that fact that, like, one of the things that apparently was not, that they didn't do in zoos back then, in one of the first scenes, is have apes. Like, so in other words, one of the reasons why apes were so, like kind of such a fascination in movies and stuff is because at that time, zoos just didn't keep them and stuff. So it's interesting how that's like one of the first things he starts off with. So to me, I feel like that's, for some reason that, maybe it's Peter Jackson making it clear that he's making his version of the whole kind of story and stuff. So, in other words, I don't by any means believe that he did that by accident or neglect.
No, I think that's probably some sort of message of, this is what these people are used to seeing or experiencing apes, and they're gonna see something a lot different soon. So I'm sure it's that kind of message that he was trying to put across. And I mean, I think Peter Jackson is. You've got to remember, this is after like 3 Lord of the Rings movies that were all 3 hours long. That's kind of why he's become like this behemoth King Kong style character in Hollywood who makes these epic fantasy movies.
Right.
And but the other thing is, he's also a foreigner who's come in, who's been taken away from his native land, and he's like this kind of monster in Hollywood, who's and so I kind of feel, in a way, he's kind of displaced, much like kind of Kong is in a way. So I wonder if, having spent, I suppose, so many years on New Zealand making Lord of the Rings and being very involved in this, working with all these big sort of stars, and then going probably to Hollywood and starting to be in that. He probably.
But they tried to chain him.
yeah. Basically, probably the studio was trying to chain him down. That was the way I kind of felt about it. And I guess likewise, Ann Darrow's character kind of expands on what we already saw with Jessica Lange's character. It was hinted at, because we see her now as a vaudeville slapstick comedian, but she refuses to be exploited and do the sort of like dancing girl thing, which is an interesting kind of slant for her character, and shows that she's not prepared to be exploited.
Yeah, and for Naomi Watts too as an actress, because she's actually one of those weird kind of like she's clearly talented and stuff, but she's pretty much like, for the most part, like this was one of the few blockbuster type movies that she's ever done in her career. She's done a lot of indie, like kind of the like kind of the more like one of her first movies was in fact Mulholland Drive and stuff. With kind of David Lynch, and so she's pretty much stuck to that kind of whole indie kind of niche, I guess, so to speak.
Well, I think what interested her about Mulholland Drive and this is that it's both how women are represented and treated within show business. It's kind of, there's definitely, that's the connection I would see there. I mean, in this one, you've got her, you know, trying to kill herself on the stage, but not be exploited, desperate to become an entertainer and a star. But the same, she then ends up trying to sort of make herself be valued to Kong in some way, or kind of communicate with it, and him sort of like, you know, thinking he's, you know, I don't know, gonna eat her or something. And then she starts doing her slapstick audition, basically. So it's almost like she's doing an audition for Kong, and I kind of feel that's like, you know, this is a statement on her sort of how you get people's attention in show business. In a way, you've got to kind of, you know, throw yourself about and be slapstick to appeal to a more primitive kind of mind, in a way. I mean, I don't know what kind of Peter Jackson's opinion of slapstick humor is, but obviously it's engineered towards apes in Kong. I have a feeling though he probably absolutely loves slapstick humor in movies from that era, because that's probably why he chose King Kong to remake it. He's probably very into those kind of movies. I've heard he's a real cinephile, actually, Peter Jackson, as
no doubt,
movie makers, but I bet is he especially much so for Japan.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as you kind of talked about that, you know, here's a movie that's like, you know, 3 hours long and stuff, and it's interesting how there was one of the you know, people on Core or whatever was basically, you know, like ranking the King Kong movies, and said that this was his, you know, least favorite and stuff because of the length. And I thought that was interesting because for me, you know, until I watched it, I had to admit that like I thought that it would be like, you know, I would be put off by the length and stuff like that. And the initial, you know, first 20 minutes or so is really establishing, you know, the Ann Darrow character, and we really see like kind of, you know, like the things that kind of don't make sense at that time, or it's almost like kind of the long play, so to speak, because, you know, the things that like we established about her, you know, basically like you kind of pointed out, her, you know, kind of basically, you know, performing her heart out, at the same time being really desperate and stuff. It really kind of makes sense then, or it seems to be kind of reflect more on her character when we do see her, like you said, doing a song and dance for Kong. It really connects that, because in other words, if we just simply rush right through to her being basically, you know, swept away by Carl Denham, played by, you know, in this case, Jack Black, it would have seemed like, you know, like kind of, we wouldn't have the same impact of understanding why she's doing this kind of silly song and dance, you know, in front of Kong and everything. But I think that like what it shows is kind of like this kind of heart of, you know, as we kind of talked about different times about the kind of save the cat moment. We were, you know, like it was one of those times when she was, you know, basically with one of the other performers of the vaudeville show, and he's like saying, you know, I'm going to hang up my hat, I'm going back to Chicago, and she's like, you know, she's looking with sadness at like, you know, here's somebody who's giving up their dream and everything, and she's, you know, not willing to do that, and so she, you know, basically is at the point of stealing an apple and stuff to stay alive, and that's when, you know, when she and, you know, Denham collide, and he kind of basically proposes, you know, hey, come with me on this, you know, journey, and you know, I'll make you a star and all that kind of stuff, and then, in other words, kind of her path really makes sense and stuff. And in fact, what I feel like what we really see is that like, even though the movie's called King Kong, it's really her story and stuff.
Yeah, I would say so, definitely. And I think the major theme as well is exploitation. You know, there's much more on Kong being exploited by a movie producer and being, or trying to stave off being exploited by the industry she's in. And the interesting thing for me in this one is, or the role that's really much more expanded on, is Jack Black as Denham, which I think is firstly an interesting casting role, because he's not a good guy. You know, he's basically the bad guy of the movie, and it's interesting to see them, you know, giving Jack Black that opportunity. And I think he did a great job, actually. I enjoyed Jack Black in that role, because he is quite charismatic, but also, you know, very sort of mercenary, which is exactly how I would imagine a Hollywood producer would be, probably. But again, it's kind of, the nice thing you see about this is that he's just as desperate as the people who are out on the streets, and he's doing everything in every which way to try and get this next movie. And it's only by, using real sort of cutthroat tactics and managing to sort of sacrifice half his crew that he actually gets the movie made and actually becomes, everyone slapping his back and saying what a great job you've done at the end of it. Right. And again, I think this, in a way, what I liked about the way they portrayed his character was that he's always filming things. And so, when his crew are getting killed, he's there sort of creepily filming everything. Yeah. But this is kind of like a real precursor of social media, rubberneck filming accidents and beatings and all this kind of stuff. And there's this weird kind of, in that whole trend, in one respect, we see it as, I'm kind of reporting this to the world. Mm-hmm. But we all know you're filming it because you're being a voyeur initially. Right. Deep down, that's the basic instinct. That's why people, rubberneck on the road when they're seeing there's an accident and stuff. So in a way, he's sort of, I think he's embodying that in Carl Denham's character, and it's kind of it's kind of a little bit prescient, I think, of what happened in society a bit more.
And it's also an interesting question about what's it saying, though, to the fact that, like, he has these willing participants, right, like, who do sacrifice their lives. I mean, the sound guy's the first one to go, and then then the camera guy, on and on, like, and never mind, like, the rest of the crew of the ship, like, all these people, like, kind of like dying like flies. And like, even though that, like, they find him despicable for the fact that, like, he's keeping the camera rolling and stuff like that, but like, kind of at the same time, like, nobody, like, bumps him off. You're like, kind of, you would think that at some point somebody kind of, in fact, Jack Driscoll, and we'll definitely get more into it, the screenwriter, he's the one who's, like, one of the first people that he dupes into, like, or cons into staying on the ship, because of the fact that, like, he's basically telling him, like, oh, I'm going to write you the check and stuff like that. And meanwhile, like, the ship is pulling out and everything. And so, Driscoll ends up, played by Adrian Brody. He's basically sucked into the whole trip because of the fact that, like, he got, lied to and deceived by, Denham and stuff.
Well, again, I mean, he's kind of like, this shows the difference in society a little bit of who is the hero, the male hero. We had someone who's the sort of rough and tough guy who's going to go and save the woman. Then we kind of had, like, the smart hippie in the 70s who's more sensitive. And now we've got, like, the self-branded creative in the 2005 version as the playwright. He's the Jack, it's a Jack Driscoll play. It's kind of like he's the precursor of your social media self-branding. So,
and somebody that we'll see again in future episodes, with is Kyle Chandler, who plays Bruce Baxter, and so he plays very much what we kind of typically picture as, like, the the hero because of how he looks and stuff. And so it's interesting for me because I'm a big fan of the Friday Night Lights series and stuff, which he's, like, the main character is Coach Taylor. And here he's, like, very cowardly and like, kind of just almost like the opposite. In fact, at one point he even says, kind of, oh, okay, the heroes don't look like me in the real world. I'm just an actor with a gun who's lost his motivation.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, no, it's good stuff. It's, again, a bit of a peek behind the scenes, the idea of that, anyway. Because, I mean, that reminds me of this quote where I think it was in one of the Marvel movies, they were talking to one of the stars, and they said, it was so much fun doing the fight scenes, but everyone is desperate not to get hit. Because you won't be able to shoot the next day and things. So it's funny, we kind of hold up, we sort of see, Chris Hemsworth as this, strapping guy, but, he's probably there going, oh, no, please, no. I don't ruin my close-up. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other really nice touch I liked in this was actually on the ship, because it takes a long time on the ship. But when they're they're actually filming the scenes. They're actually using the lines from the 1933 original,
Oh yeah,
which I thought was really cool. And just inserting those in was really, nice touch.
definitely. That was pretty funny. And for me, actually, like I saw the original Kong so long ago, so it was interesting to kind of watch this, like kind of. I kind of watched it again after watching the original, and so I didn't know like kind of that was the source of the lines. It was interesting, kind of like you said, how you clearly see how Jackson's a fan paying homage to his favorites.
Yeah, totally. And the other line I think is interesting is someone talks about there being monsters on Skull Island, and they says, monsters belong in B movies, is a line in there. But in a way, it's kind of, I think Peter Jackson he took basically what was a fairly dead genre, which was, the fantasy genre,
right,
and basically just kind of re-injected a whole new life into it. Because, the 80s pretty much killed off warriors from ancient times. And it took a while for us to get excited about that again. And I think that was probably the aim of King Kong. But it did. I mean, it was a success. It made like a good couple of $100 million.
Oh yeah.
But it certainly didn't start a new trend of monster movies, I would say.
Yeah.
I don't know that Pacific Rim and a few Godzilla remakes really constitutes a huge kind of need for it. But I think the other interesting thing that I noticed in this, mostly because it was taking so long to actually get to the island. But they start quoting Heart of Darkness as they arrive on Skull Island. And I thought it was interesting that they kind of built on that in the 2017 version, because it almost has an Apocalypse Now kind of vibe to it.
Definitely.
But I mean, by about an hour and 15, however long it takes them to actually get to the island, there's slow motion clips of them getting the boat ready, and they're doing passages from Heart of Darkness, and it's like, come on, let's just get to the island. So
that was sort of funny trend at that time, because we've seen that actually in a few of the other remakes, where they just some reason seem to have this fascination with that slow motion kind of effect. That seemed to be kind of the in thing for these cinematographers at the time.
Yeah, and it's not very effective. It actually kind of took me out of the movie quite a lot. I was really, and apart from anything else, why slow this movie down any more than it doesn't need slowing down?
Okay, I will say though, the one point that I did think that it was effective was when the natives first attacked the party and stuff. So I thought that was like kind of so to me, like so many things, right? Use it sparingly, like find like kind of like it's kind of cool and stuff like that. But when it was like used for like some really it was Adrian Brody kind of typing and stuff. It was like they're trying to stretch out the drama of that, him typing that out. Like, was that really that's necessary?
We didn't need all that. Yeah. And I would say, I mean, the natives in this one are, we've got definitely, it's not a like for like remake. We've got sort of South Sea Islander natives this time. We're definitely trying as best as we can to avoid having any African Americans as the natives. So that was the change. But they're indigenous people who are terrifying. In fact, they're probably the most terrifying. They're probably worse than the dinosaurs and the other things. That's probably the scariest part of the whole island.
Yeah, on Skull Island, I would rank, the dinosaurs only slightly above the natives and stuff. And then actually slightly above that would be like the insects.
Yeah, the insects. Oh my God. That was, I mean, I think we have to sort of, what is this, a PG-13 movie? It's pretty horrific, that scene with the insects. Andy Serkis getting his head consumed by some massive leech was pretty horrific. And it's made, actually, what's really effective about this is actually the soundtrack. And this is one of those moments where You've had so much action. The action is really relentless. You've got the natives attacking, and then they've got kind of like dinosaurs, and then on the run, and then they're kind of being bowled over. And it's just at this moment when you think they can have a moment of respite.
Right.
And there's nothing but this kind of eerie kind of music just in the background as they're attacked by these like terrifying insects that are kind of biting their limbs off and sucking their heads off and things like this. It's a really effective, and it is actually quite genuinely terrifying, that scene, I found.
Definitely.
And yeah.
I was gonna say, speaking of Andy Serkis, though, of course, this is where we see like kind of like his work with motion capture continuing on from Lord of the Rings, and like where and what's funny is like we're going to get more into it in the future discussion about Planet of the Apes, and it's like kind of we've seen kind of this continual refinement of this kind of new art, right? This combination of acting combined with digital effects.
Yeah. I mean, so I mean you've got Andy Serkis as Kong basically, and as a kind of quite
Lumpy.
Lumpy, the chef, which I thought was pretty amusing. But yeah, it's obviously very well done. I mean, the technology is very good for Kong, and there's been a clear step up from a guy in a monkey suit in the '76 version.
And I think the thing that's really captures is just like even though like what's funny is like it's clearly anthropomorphic and everything, like kind of giving an ape like so many kind of human kind of emotions and stuff, but yet it's really effective though, like because we see like kind of how he and Ann Darrow like kind of interact, and we kind of really it's at first it's kind of like this kind of like funny like thing of where she's trying to entertain him and catch his attention, and then as time evolves it's like we really see like kind of that a believable like kind of, you can't even really call it a romance, but it's and definitely not like the '76 version, but it's a sweet kind of friendship that like where like it's like a in and of itself you really can see and understand why it is that like here's this kind of massive beast that's willing to kind of sacrifice his love for this human being and stuff. Like in other words, it's less of a kind of weird, creepy, or kind of like some of the other ones and stuff. It's more something that like we see like kind of this friendship evolve, and then like where then it's what we see is like kind of a creature who's like alone on this island and stuff. That the other kind of parts of his race are gone, and here he finds somebody else who kind of understands him to some degree, and like kind of, and so he wants to hold on to that and stuff.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. That was the same impression I got. The way they portray that Kong and Darrow relationship is that Kong seems to be living on this incredibly brutal island where you get attacked at any moment by horrific creatures. And this is, by the bit where he's asleep and he's just sort of randomly attacked by a bunch of killer bats. Right. And so you think his life up to this point has just been like these weird islanders who occasionally give him someone to eat. And he's like fighting off these creatures, and she sort of is there entertaining him and sort of giving him these brief moments of kind of semi-human entertainment or something that relates to a simple escape sort of friendship thing. And I think that's what's quite sort of tragic about that, is that you see this very sort of brutal life where he's constantly in danger, and she represents the only breaks in that sort of something that isn't him having to survive essentially. So again, she's kind of, you've got the woman representing the kind of civilizing nature, but it's not so much in terms of a romantic relationship, but more in just kind of how a human would treat another human, which is a sort of a subtle sort of difference, but it's an interesting one nonetheless.
Yeah, and I feel like, kind of along the lines of, our ape month, kind of theme stuff, is here's this creature that is more human, right, than the humans. Like Carl Denham, like we've said, is clearly the monster in this one, where like kind of besides his kind of, sociopathic tendencies and stuff, he's, like kind of just like he constantly is, like one of the kind of running jokes is like, oh, all proceeds will go to, this guy's family and stuff, and clearly not. Like each case, like we know that he's not going to honor any of that and stuff. He's in it for himself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other interesting thing for me is in terms of redefining Ann Darrow's character is that when they've just about to capture Kong and Adrian Brody's trying to save her, when she sees that their plan is to kind of trap him and exploit him, she decides she doesn't want to be saved by Adrian Brody. And that's the kind of point where all of her sort of interests, you realize that he's not that different from all the others that are getting ready to kind of like, you know, just completely sort of destroy this animal's welfare. So that was an interesting sort of shift as well. I think as well, the fact that when she goes back to New York, she shuns the stardom that's kind of would have been hers, and you see her in this sort of lineup, and then you realize it's not her in the King Kong show. Right. It's her in some small production, which I thought was, again, it's kind of like she's very sort of disciplined in that she's determined not to either be party to being exploited or being involved in something that exploits, you know, Kong as well. Right. So yeah, it's an interesting sort of character twist.
Yeah. It all makes sense again of like kind of going back to like the original kind of 20 minutes of stuff where again it seemed lengthy when you first watch it, but then you know it all makes sense though, like you know, because if we had just kind of again just jumped to her jumping ship with you know, Carl Denham and stuff, we would have missed out on kind of just showing that aspect of her character, and then like it wouldn't have made as much sense for her to kind of basically not sell out and kind of join the troop and stuff like that. Yeah.
And I think you do feel considerably more sorry for Kong when he's on stage. He really does look sort of completely beaten down. Yeah, I know. It's really effectively done, actually. This kind of thing, though, with how realistic though was it really that when they were ice skating on the, you know, I guess it's Central Park or something. It's, I mean, I know it's there to sort of create this lull before the action of the finale, right? But I don't know. That was kind of like, yeah, I think there'd be quite a few screaming people and guns going off and things. I don't think you'd have like 2 minutes of ice skating with a giant gorilla. But anyway.
Yeah, I think with other directors and other, you know, kind of execution, it would have flopped and stuff like that. But with just the way that like, you know, Peter Jackson kind of like is willing to kind of take the time and you know, like just the different ways that he kind of handled things throughout, it worked for me because of that. Like in other words, done with less capable hands and with like kind of you know, like just shoddy execution, it would be kind of, you would have thrown your shoulders up and kind of go, you know, what the heck is this and stuff. But because of just like, again, just how he kind of is really meticulous about kind of just where he puts different things, it didn't feel like it was like kind of just wrenched into the whole overall movie and stuff.
Yeah. Also, Kong would have definitely broken the ice. There's no way that ice would have supported him. But yeah. But yeah, you're right. It was only because I was being picky, really, that I noticed that.
So onto the last of the series. So this one is the second of the new MonsterVerse by Legendary. It's you know, basically they've kind of combined the whole Godzilla and Kong franchise into this, you know, huge intricate story that has different layers and stuff. And in this case, you know, we're kind of, you know, introduced again into the series. It's pretty much the same basic premise, right? Because, you know, here they even call it like Kong Skull Island. And so so that's the big aspect of it. I think what's really, you know, makes it unique is, like you said, like kind of the more the different kind of references, like, you know, to Heart of Darkness / you know, Apocalypse Now, introduction of some interesting characters, like you know, Tom Hiddleston. You know, I have to admit that like I haven't thought of much of him in, you know, like kind of the Thor series as Loki. Like, you know, he's kind of like an interesting kind of villain, but I just, you know, kind of think of him as pretty comical. But here, I actually, you know, find him as a believable hero for some reason. And you know, in fact, I feel like, you know, this is like kind of a role that he's more I feel like he's more made for that role than a kind of a comical kind of villain.
Really, because I mean, I found him totally unconvincing.
Oh, interesting.
He's supposed to be a special ops kind of like guy who goes and rescues people or does, and it's like, no, he's like, looks like he's educated in a public school in England and will probably go and work for like a banking financial institution at some point. He certainly doesn't strike me as like your Black Ops character. So I just didn't find, a plummy sort of well-raised English lad. No, sorry, I just found that totally unbelievable.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Because I mean, I found him totally unconvincing.
Oh, interesting.
He's supposed to be a special ops kind of like guy who goes and rescues people or does, and it's like, no, he's like, looks like he's educated in a public school in England and will probably go and work for like a banking financial institution at some point. He certainly doesn't strike me as like your Black Ops character. So I just didn't find, a plummy sort of well-raised English lad. No, sorry, I just found that totally unbelievable.
I don't know. I guess it's my kind of like maybe cliche or stereotype that when I think of like a British mercenary, I would think that he would be kind of more have this kind of, like you said, an English private school kind of upbringing and stuff like that. That, like, in other words, I would not think of him as kind of more of a somebody from the South Bank or something like that. I don't know. That's at least my impression of a British mercenary.
Yeah, I don't know.
Apparently, that's not the case for you.
I don't know. I mean, I have known some actually. Funnily enough, I was speaking to a guy here whose his brother was in the SAS, and he was quite a posh guy. Who and his brother must have obviously been quite posh, and they both went to public schools. So maybe you're more right than I am, but I don't know. It didn't. It's maybe not what I expect to see. I mean, for me, I think the problem was there were so many Marvel characters in this. It almost felt
Brie
like
Larson, Samuel Jackson,
like Captain Marvel, Nick Fury, and Loki. Go and find King Kong featuring Dr. Steve Brule. It was like, it was felt a bit sort of strange in that respect. And I mean, I don't know. My overall impression was that it all just seemed, well, it started off with something I didn't really like, in that it has a sort of a fact montage, which is very much a modern filmmaking thing, is where you've got the year is this, this happened, Kennedy got shot, and none of this, best because just in case you're all completely idiots and have no historical context, we're going to give you all the background in flashbacks and images in the first 5 minutes of the movie. It's just something I just really don't like at all. Then it was kind of it's kind of set, well, weirdly enough, it's set in the 70s, like 3 years before 1976, when the other remake was made, which is a weird thing. But it just seems everyone's so bored in the movie. It just seemed like no one was really. It's this kind of thing where we've got this thing where Hollywood heroes have to be kind of stoic. That's become law. But now you've got like at least 5 or 6 characters who are all like stoic, and no one's reacting to anything anymore. It's like when they see. I'm trying to remember what their reactions were. There was. Oh God, what was it? I'm trying to remember what actually happened. There's a sort of, there's just no emotion in the performances. There's a bit of indignation from Brie Larson, but everyone else is just kind of delivering exposition. And I don't know, I mean, Toby Kebbell, his reaction on seeing Kong is that a monkey? Brie Larson raises her eyebrows and Tom Hiddleston says nothing. I mean, it's just like the whole experience is like, this is supposed to be, he's like a mountain-sized Kong, and everyone's just like, huh. I mean, it's just, and then, you've got the other character who's desperately sort of, he's there to desperately try and muster up the audience's excitement factor by saying, aren't we going to talk about that? That's not normal, right? No, it's not. And it's like, but yeah, you have to have a character pointed out because none of the performances are expressing the actual shock and awe of what's happening.
Yeah, it is interesting that like they chose Brie Larson, right? Who, you know, she's really not known for like being, you know, emotional. Like, you know, one of her big roles was this indie film called Room, where here's this person who like, you know, undergoes these horrible conditions and stuff, and she's only really emotional like towards, you know, the end where she, you know, again, as always, major spoilers, even in movies we're not talking about directly. But yeah, she's, and even then, like, kind of, you know, after undergoing these horrific conditions, she just kind of, you know, just gets a little bit upset and then, you know, cries a little bit. And then, so yeah, she, out of all the different, you know, Marvel characters, she's probably one of the least emotional.
I mean, and I don't necessarily have a problem with that per se. I actually thought, you know, the way she did Captain Marvel was she did it so kind of stoically that it actually threw audiences, because it's not really what we're prepared to see from a leading lady in that kind of. Leading lady is probably not really the best way of trying to justify that, but so say an actor, female actor. So I think that kind of threw people, and I thought it's one of those ones that's going to be more interesting looking back on, I think, sort of historically, because a lot of people really didn't like her performance, but I think that's more of a comment on what we're expecting from a female superhero. But in this one, when you've got all five of your leading actors all being underwhelmed or being, it's just Kong, you know, it's kind of someone's got to get excited about this or fearful or something, or it loses all the facts. But
well, yeah. I mean, they did kind of find that a little bit when they finally reached John C. Reilly.
Yeah, but I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know, it's weird kind of having him as a, you know, associated sort of. I mean, it was quite good. He was probably one of the characters I enjoyed the most in the movie, really, because I don't know, I just like John C. Reilly anyway. But yeah, that was an interesting choice because he has to be. Because I mean, he's there really because this one, you can't have dangerous women abducting indigenous people anymore on islands. So now he's like the mediator who manages to speak their language, so that we've got, you know, so that we can fulfill that box on the political correctness register of Kong, which is already on shaky ground already, being a remake of Kong. So you've got to do absolutely everything you can to, you know, offset that.
I mean, that's in itself one of the most interesting things about this one, right? Where, you know, it's almost like a post-PC world where we can't have, you know, like kind of, you know, Brie Larson as like kind of, you know, chained to this rack to be taken away by Kong and stuff. So instead, you know, we have like this, you know, the natives are in fact like kind of dependent on Kong for their safety and stuff, and so, you know, it's kind of more symbiotic, you know, kind of relationship where they basically occasionally throw him a bone and he protects them and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this movie lost the whole point of the originals, really, which was that, you know, I mean, this idea, even if you take the subconscious racism out of it all, it's this idea of like something primitive and untamed destroying civilization, right?
Yeah.
And this one, you've kind of got like something that's not that primitive, can somehow assess, you know, which side is the good side or not, and kind of just sort of mediate a struggle. It's more like a diplomatic Kong in this one. It's really kind of and it loses all kind of, you know. There's no commentary on what makes us human, what makes us primitive or animalistic. It's kind of all it says is that like war is bad, basically, and don't go and try and blow everything up on someone else's island. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's really what it seems to kind of really drive at, like kind of, you know, because of how even like kind of the opening scene, right, is like, you know, like the young version of the John C. Reilly character, you know, fending for his life after a dog fight and everything, and then like, you know, they're the two survivors of where they end up not only surviving but then cooperating and stuff to stay alive on this dangerous island and stuff. And only to for the outside world to come, like kind of during the end of the Vietnam War. So that's kind of some interesting kind of choices there.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose it's, they keep making mention of it, like, oh, we lost the war, but we're not going to lose this one. Sam Jackson is kind of like Colonel Kurtz of this movie, who's gone slightly insane and is there, but he's not actually kind of integrated or hasn't sort of set up anything with the people there, kind of like Colonel Kurtz did in Apocalypse Now. But there's obviously that kind of theme going. I did like that he was a bad guy in it, though, because that's always nice to see Samuel L. Jackson playing a bad guy. He did seem incredibly bored, though, when he was reciting the quote from, I don't know, he was giving some quote from something, and as he was saying it, he just seemed so bored with what he was doing. He was just like, oh, just give me a paycheck already. It was just, the other problem, of course, I have in it is dodgy accents, and we've got Toby Kebbell. No. Why they decided to cast someone English as having, like, Southern States accent in a movie is just, I don't know. It's just terrible. You couldn't just make him an English actor, or an English soldier or something. I didn't understand the point of that. And he didn't even really have much to do in the movie. He just gets eaten, and that's about it, really, and says, oh, is that a monkey? And that was about it. That's all he did. So, and then we have these weird creatures under them. So this is, I don't know. I mean, okay, you've got kind of people not being the top of the food chain. But to me, this kind of, I think the problem with this is that King Kong is really not a politically correct movie by any stretch of the imagination. The source material is almost fundamentally, works on sexism and racism and everything else. And if you try and remove all of that, you don't really have much left. There's not really much substance left to King Kong once you take all of that out.
So thus they threw in the war theme, right, and stuff, and so they basically interjected like kind of all the things that about the fact that like you're in post Vietnam era and stuff, and so I think that's the kind of connection that like I don't know how conscious they were of it, but part of the whole point of the Vietnam War was here you have a more primitive culture that fought off the more advanced kind of forces and stuff, and so it's interesting to kind of choose that. And so I think that's what they were trying to amplify then, was this idea though that like we think of technology as like kind of the end all, and that like it'll always win in the end. But not only did we lose a war kind of despite that, but also here you're seeing that like in a bigger scale that it's not only going to not solve your problems, but it's going to possibly create bigger problems, which is kind of like what one of the key themes of the whole legendary monsterverse and stuff. Like that's something that we don't see so much in this one, but we do see that more in the other Godzilla movies and stuff. In fact, that's definitely one of the reasons why I'm looking forward to kind of our discussions about that. Is I think that at least that's kind of handled more in an interesting fashion. Here, like I think they just basically are trying to just establish Kong and bring him into the whole fold, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah, that was like by the end of the movie, I was, and then they had the sort of the post credits thing. I was just like, oh, so this was all like a very carefully strategized marketing move to try and desperately create some kind of franchise that they can spin off more movies from, and have Godzilla versus King Kong, and Mecha Godzilla and Mothra, and I was like, oh god, just you can't make just one movie by itself anymore. It has to be part of a bigger franchise that you can do.
Well, right. I mean, that's of course what we really have gotten to, right? And so I don't know how much of that ties into like kind of the things that play out in the movie. But let's face it, that is the world that we're really in now, in terms of anytime that you have a big budget movie now, it's got to be part of this kind of bigger universe that can have possible tie-ins, that can have like kind of different interwoven storylines and stuff like that. It's something that was established, of course, with Marvel and DC, and so it's just something that like I think that's like we're just not only way beyond it, we're deep into it and stuff.
Yeah, I think my other kind of criticism of this is that it's got, yet again, there's this terrible kind of unfunny dialogue between Cole and the other character all the way through. They're kind of like the comic relief, whilst all the stoic characters are doing kind of like not reacting emotionally to anything at all. These two are the only kind of thing to kind of show any kind of human traits. And but all the dialogue's pretty awful. I didn't really find any of it. It's all too kind of like meta and, a bit too knowing of itself. And again, you kind of course you've got like an African-American guy being the jokester in the movie. God, it's like how many more movies since the 80s and so on do we need to see that? But it's okay because they've also got a smart African-American who's been to Yale, so we have to identify with him as the smart character. I'm being very cynical now, but it's just kind of, it seems like it tries so hard to be PC, but it kind of just, it just goes, it falls flat on its face in the process.
Yeah, and another more telling part about that, beyond PC even, is like interjecting, like kind of the Asian, like the actress that they chose she's pretty well established in China and stuff like that. But here, like it's like, again, this kind of thing where her talent is basically wasted because she has like maybe one or two lines, like kind of saying something obscure, and then otherwise she's along for the ride.
Yeah. She's visually there, like a United Colors of Benetton advert or something, but doesn't really actually contribute any character or meaning to the story at all. Which was kind of like the same thing with the Magnificent Seven remake as well. So yeah.
And especially with like kind of different times, they want to like basically curry the favor of the Asian market and stuff like that. I mean, that's like kind of, it used to be, of course, before, like maybe before the token black man, right, and stuff. Now it's like the token Asian. It's like almost like kind of just become the cliche.
Yeah. Although it's a slight improvement on the 1933 character of Charlie, who I forgot to mention this earlier.
Talk about that?
I know, right? Like he's there's talking to Ann Darrow, and she not only doesn't understand what he says, but then just laughs, almost like, oh, what's that crazy foreign guy saying over there? And Victor Wong didn't even get a credit in the movie for that.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
yeah,
things have progressed, I guess.
In theory. So. But yeah, it's like that's a whole thing that we can probably have like a lengthy discussion about is the roles of Asian Americans or for that matter, it's just Asian actors in American cinema. It's like the earliest ones, of course, like Charlie Chan and stuff like that, and like kind of talk about white painting and stuff like that. It's like whiteface. It's just it's definitely that's just another whole discussion.
Yeah. But well, they're setting up a Godzilla franchise, so they've got to try and tie in some Asian characters into this movie, although they won't be able to cross over into those other ones, I guess, as well. Of course. So, yeah.
I mean, I guess for me, like, because of the fact that, like, my expectations were pretty low for going into this one and stuff, because I just kind of thought of it as like, kind of like, oh, I kind of knew that it was part of this whole franchise scheme and stuff like that. And, because of that, like, it was just a fun romp, kind of just to basically get, Kong established. And I guess I took it for its face value. So this is, of course, before seeing the 2005, which is, by many, like kind of exponential factors superior, stuff like that, as a storytelling and / kind of, movie in itself. So I just had fun watching it. I mean, I guess that's the thing that, like, I just, because I had very low expectations and stuff, I just was looking to be entertained. It was fine.
Yeah, I had low expectations and they were not met. So yeah, awful. I mean, I think on rewatching them, the interesting thing here was that you watched them backwards in order.
Yes.
You watched 2017 and worked your way back to 1933, and I did it the other way around.
Right.
And so I guess for me it was more interesting to see the progression of the characters. But I think definitely the 2005 was actually my favorite watch, even though it was the longest.
Yeah.
Probably then followed by the 1933, just because it's just so on PC. And and then it's like a toss-up between Skull Island and the 76. They're both pretty awful movies, really. I think probably Skull Island's probably the worst. I think I'd still rate the 76, just because it's so creepy and perverse, the 76 one. So I think that's why I kind of enjoyed that slightly more than Skull Island. That was very boring as well. So
interesting. Yeah, so for me, like, it was, also, I totally agree about the 2005, of course, but I actually put Skull Island above the 76 version and stuff. Okay. And then the 33, like, I had to just rank it higher just because it's the classic and stuff like that. So I probably put that one second, so.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting sort of doing these kind of things, because you ask yourself in one stage, is criticism of a movie from 1933, is it even valid, or,
right?
Is it worth doing this exercise? How much point is there in really sort of looking back on these? But I think there's definitely some value to it, because I just think what's interesting about it is that you just assume that obviously, there's going to be some really un-PC stuff in the 1933 version. I think it was interesting to see just how it's still carried on. It's not as different as we expect. I think that's the most telling thing for me. So yeah, I think it is worth going through the exercise, and I don't think you can kind of just sort of make a hard rule of thumb and say, okay, critics from 1933 are the only ones you should listen to, or the people of that time, because they're doing it within a historical context. So yeah.
And it's also interesting to kind of go back to this idea of like what is like at the heart of the original and stuff, and I have to admit that I can't really argue with the fact that, like, in the most recent one, Skull Island, that they basically, kind of just glossed over, the things that make the original what it is. Like, kind of, like I said, the even though that, like, as un-PC as the ideas are and the themes, it's still very much, at the heart of Kong, which, like, of course, the best one that we recognized, with Peter Jackson, he really, got to the heart of the story, and then just amplified those with, kind of just building on Ann Darrow's story, and then also, of course, establishing even more the relationship between the two, and then that, further cements, like, kind of, why it's even more tragic that, here, humans kind of took this beast, from the jungle, and, kind of basically, took advantage of him, and then, ultimately, to destroy him and stuff like that. And it's again, that thing of, that we talked about earlier, that even though, like, Carl Denham says, kind of that, it was beauty that killed them and stuff. No, it was actually, human greed. Like, kind of, that was very much the real destructive force in all of this.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, I was also going to sort of say, the one thing I don't agree with that seems to be like a modern trend with streaming movies is that, okay, let's just say there's an un-PC movie like Gone with the Wind, and then they just kind of don't show it anymore.
Yeah.
Which I think in a way is also just as bad as trying to kind of like completely rewrite Kong in a completely different way, because I just, that doesn't seem to me to be any more helpful either, really. I mean, I think adding a discussion bit or something like that onto it is a good idea, but you can't rewrite history. But also, by the same token, is it actually worth trying to remake Kong? It's like, if the result is Skull Island, I would say just leave it on PC and put it to bed, move on to something else. You're just going to kind of, it's probably going to be like a bit like Planet of the Apes. I don't really see that as something where you'd have to be, you've got to do it more cleverly than they've done in some of the more recent remakes, I would say.
And also, I thought that was the point of, works like Fahrenheit 451, you know, 1984, where, you know, like kind of that warned us about, you know, kind of the dangers of revisionist history. And here we are doing it, you know, like kind of to ourselves. Like, you know, it's not even some, you know, some, you know, big brother entity and stuff. It's us through, you know, our kind of ignorance / you know, like desire to be PC.
Yeah. And the difference, of course, there is that they make the point in Fahrenheit 451 that, you know, you can't rewrite history, but for some reason we think that rewriting culture is okay because it's not actual history, it's fictional stuff. But as we've sort of talked about before, culture plays a huge part of how we form our opinions about, you know, real events. So, yeah, I think it's a kind of it's a worrying trend, really. But yeah, we can just hope that kind of people at least sort of try to, you know, just retain these things, but add some kind of perspective to them, or because it, of course, actually. It requires you to do some sort of historical reading as well. So, you know, on the part of the viewer, you have to actually kind of like have some, you know, knowledge in order to view these films in their correct context. So that the fact that we kind of think that, oh, well, you know, our poor millennial children won't have the historical context, we must protect them from it, is kind of a real mistake in my opinion. But
yeah. I mean, that's just like the other trend of like, you know, helicopter parents, right? Wanting to, you know, basically, protect our kids from everything and stuff. And you know, I mean, the kind of the extreme joke is like kind of talking about how, you know, when like we were kids, like, you know, we didn't have seatbelts or, you know, things like that. I mean, that's not to say that like, you know, we should ride around without seatbelts, you know, never mind like, you know, face masks nowadays and stuff. But it's to say though that like, you know, there is such a thing as overprotection where it's doing more harm by, you know, our attempts to protect rather than, you know, the intended benefit, which is like kind of to have them grow up in a more understanding and or with greater understanding and with greater empathy and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you know, education and knowledge and providing that context is the key, really.
And you know, like I mean, in one small way or another, like for us, it's part of the point of why we have these discussions too, is because you know, like kind of, I mean, imagine a world where people are discussing these ideas with greater understanding, with greater, you know, kind of, you know, like their willingness, kind of, you know, do their own research and kind of, you know, not to simply jump to conclusions, not to simply, you know, go with what somebody else has kind of told you is like kind of the story and stuff. You know, imagine what a world like that would be.
Yeah, and I think that's what's been most interesting for doing the you know, the series of looking at remakes and the originals, is that I've actually understood, like I said, culture plays such an important part of our frame of reality as we grow up and things, that I've realized quite a few sort of things about why I think about certain things, like the stoic hero and you know, how women are portrayed and things like this. This was programmed into me from a fairly early age through movies throughout like the 70s and 80s. So it is, for me, it's a really interesting process, definitely.
Yeah, so coming up, we've got we're going to continue more of our Ape Mania with revisit the Planet of the Apes, and then, you know, further along, you know, it's funny how the story was done once again with going to an island, getting an ape off, and then you know, wreaking havoc in the civilized world with Mighty Joe Young. So you know, that's coming up, and we would look forward to again having you join us. I'm John Chan with Dan Edmonds, and once again, thanks for watching, and we'll talk with you soon.